All right, welcome back. So today we're going to take a look at step one, which is Adobe Camera RAW global adjustments. So we're inside of Photoshop right here, and I'm going to go up to the top left-hand corner and hit open. And I'm going to navigate to this folder that I created that has some images in it. And we're going to go ahead and open this image up here first. And so when we have a RAW file, and so let's first explain what a RAW file is. There's really two ways to think about it. RAW in photography is an image that has not been edited yet. And there are RAW files. They've been shot in a RAW format, such as CR2, CR3, NEF. I forget Sony's AWS, A something, ARS. I can't remember what they are. But they're formats. Adobe has one called DNG. And what happens with that is when you shoot a JPEG file in a camera, you have a bunch of settings, color settings, sharpness, color profiles. And when you take the picture, it applies that in the computer inside of the camera to the JPEG image. So your exposure, color balance, everything is set. If you shoot in RAW, it's just a capture of the image and nothing has been set. And it's shot at a higher bit format. So a JPEG is always photographed in 8-bit. And we learned the last one, cameras shoot at usually 12 or 14-bit, which is much higher. So inside of Photoshop, we work in 16 bits, which would give us 64,500 shades of gray in essence. All right, we're not going to get that. It's probably in the 30s. But still, it's a lot of information. When I open that image, you notice it didn't go into Photoshop. So if we look up here on the top of this computer, it says Camera RAW 16.4. Now this is a Mac, so if you're on a PC, the number might be a little bit different. But this is our RAW file editor. And so this program, though looks a little bit different, is exactly the same as the Lightroom Develop module. They're the same program, they do the same thing. And their goal is to convert this into a working image so that Photoshop can use it. However, it's way more sophisticated than that. So we have the ability to do what we call global and selective adjustments to our image. We can clone, we can do some really cool things inside of this editor. So my goal is to show you that you need to get your image in a better position to go into Photoshop. There's some things that Adobe Camera RAW is much better at than Adobe Photoshop, and one is white balance of your image. So I just set my camera to auto white balance. I don't worry about it because I can do it after the fact. And I have a lot of control over it, something that you would not have inside of the camera. Up here is our thumbnail, and then right here we're displaying our image. And if you remember in the first video, you took a look at the preferences. We set our color balance down here to be in Adobe 98 or RGB and 16-bit. You can also just click in that and it goes back into those settings. But we already set those, so we're good to go. I'm going to go over what all these little doodads mean in time, but not right now. So one of the things that people run into, especially if you're importing your images through something like Lightroom or Bridge, creates a duplicate file underneath your file called an XMP, .xmp. Now, what that .xmp does is it stores adjustment information. So you can see in this image, I've already adjusted this. So I'm moving this to make it look better, right? I've made some adjustments and I did that on purpose because I wanted it to create that .xmp file, all right? So people get these duplicate files and they're like, oh my God, this is gonna eat up my computer. I don't want these duplicate files. They're not bad. They're text files. They're teeny tiny. However, if you can't handle it, if you import through something like Lightroom, Bridge, Photo Mechanic, you can convert your images to a DNG, and there's a type of DNG that hides the XMP information inside of it, so you just have one file. I'm not a fan of it. I don't mind the XMP files, and they're good. And so this is the reason why. A RAW file cannot be overwritten, all right? So you can't overwrite, change, resave, do anything to a RAW file. which is good. All right. If you have a JPEG and you accidentally resize it down to 4 pixels by 4 pixels and then save over the original file, you have a 4 pixel by 4 pixel image and you can't get it back. Okay. So this is a great, so not being able to overwrite your image is a good thing. So when you make the adjustments in RAW, there's no saving. You see up here, there's no saving here. And if we go to here, there's no saving, okay? So when I make this adjustment, so when I dial this anyway, all right, when I let go, it automatically saves that adjustment into the XMP file. So as I'm working, all these adjustments get saved. So what we're going to do is we're going to slide over to a program called Brackets, and it reads these XMP files. All right, so we'll scroll up here to the top. So if you import and you put in the information and the metadata, like your name, your copyright and stuff, it will store all that. But we're going to go down here, and what the XMP file stores is everything about your image, your camera, how it was shot, did it use flash, any of that information gets saved here. But we want to go down here to the CRS. And so right here, we can see white balance. All right. So we've got white balance. Okay. As shot, that's my setting. If we were to go back, what's the color temperature? 4600. So I adjusted the tint +6. Exposure is -0.4. Right. So as I adjust that, so we'll go to exposure 0.4. All right. If I was to adjust it to -0.6, it would reflect it here. So if you reopen your photo and you're in something like Adobe Camera RAW, it will refer to this XMP file and it will make the adjustments. So when you go into Photoshop, you see those reflected. If you delete the XMP file, it will just basically reset your image. So I can come in here, I can hit reset, up here, hit reset. And so now nothing's been done to this image. That's what your image will look like if you delete the XMP file. But if I come back in here and I start adjusting it again, it's going to create another one, okay? And that's where it saves that information, all right? If you just want to save your adjustments in Adobe Camera RAW and go back and not edit this in Photoshop, you would hit done. If you want to open it inside of Photoshop, you would hit open and it would then throw the image into Adobe Photoshop. So that's just a little bit of information about Adobe Camera RAW. So let's go ahead and take a look at the settings over here. So what we have right here is a histogram, and really all a histogram does is show you where the data is. So we have the blue channel, the red channel, and the green channel. It's showing you. So this is sort of a dark image. So the left-hand side is your shadows, and the right-hand side is your highlights. So we don't have a lot of bright highlights except for in our eyes and our teeth. So you can see there's not a lot of data. I don't tone with the histogram. I tone with a curves histogram, which is a little bit different, but I don't use this too much. Up here, we have some little triangles, and what these do is show if you're clipping the image. And what clipping the image means if you're either making it too bright or too dark. So I'm going to go ahead and select this. So it's this little triangle right here, and I'm going to click it. All right, and you can see it made that little triangle around it. And then I'm going to make this bright, and you're going to see a color start to appear, hopefully. No, we didn't make it bright enough. This is really not effective. All right, there's the red. So the red's saying, hey, you made the image too bright, but you can see the red's not there and the image is way too bright. I don't find it effective. And you can see how the histogram changed, all right? If you don't like the red showing up, which is I don't like it, you can simply uncheck that and it will get rid of it. And we can do the same things for the shadows. So if we make it too dark, it's going to turn blue. So we're saying, hey, that area is too dark. You need to open it up until that blue is gone because it's going to be too dense in that area. So the blue seems to be working a little bit better in this situation. If you uncheck that, don't see the clipping anymore. That's what I use. All right. Next things next down here. And this is great for when I'm teaching beginner students because it shows how you shot the image. If you ever have trouble and you're not sure why your image might be blurry or doesn't look right, you can easily take a screenshot of this and send it to someone who knows what they're doing. And boy, that's going to be a lot of information as to what you did and maybe why your image isn't so great. So down here we have edit. And so we can do auto, which computer is automatically going to tone the image how it thinks. Okay. And it does it from a standard. I find that auto is usually not correct. It doesn't do a good job. We have a black and white, so you can start toning your image as black and white. And just one thing that you should know, if you know your image is going to be black and white, toning in color is a waste of time, because a perfectly toned color image is not a perfectly toned black and white image. And then we can tone in HDR, which stands for high dynamic range. And this is really just more of a simulation of what it would look like. We're going to skip that now. So in this case, we're not going to do any of this. So I've clicked these little buttons. If I want to get out of them, I'm going to hold Option, okay? And when I hold Option, you can see the adjustment, which I did, which was auto. I'm going to reset it, okay? And then I'm going to click off black and white, and we're back to where we were. So Option, clicking on any of these things here will reset them. So if I go to exposure and I don't like it, I hold Option. I'm not positive what it is on a PC. So try Option or Alt, and my guess it's going to be one of those. You'll get reset and it puts it back to 0. It's just easier. And if you have a bunch of these adjusted and you want all these to be adjusted at the same time, hold that toggle key and just say Reset Light, and it's going to reset all these here. If something is closed, you just click on it and it will open. We'll take a look at the preferences, but you can, right now I have this set so only one stays open, but you can change the preferences so multiple stay open. But for right now, we're just going to go through this information. So our next thing down here is profile, okay? And so this is setting the color profile preset. So right now it's on Adobe Color. And how well you'll be able to see this on a YouTube video, I'm not sure. So Adobe Color is going to have a decent amount of contrast and color saturation. But if we go to landscape and I have to click it for it to apply, it's going to increase the contrast and increase the color saturation. They're just like little picture presets. These are on your camera. They do basically the same thing, but we're using the Adobe ones. I can't really tell the difference between portrait and standard, so we'll just do standard. Standard, there's less color saturation, better for skin tones. It doesn't make them super vibrant unless you want them to be super vibrant, and it lowers your contrast. We have Adobe Vivid, which makes everything really contrasty and really super saturated, all right? So for this image, I'm just going to use Adobe Color. I think that's going to be fine. However, I could do portrait or standard because this is a picture of a person. We'll just leave it on color. All right, so our next thing that we have here is white balance. And please, always do white balance. This is the best thing you can do for your image. You're going to get the color much more accurate than you can in Adobe Photoshop. Just Adobe Camera RAW is better at this. And so we can adjust those white balance presets. So if you've ever been on your camera and you see the little WB, there's going to be an auto. There's going to be a daylight, a cloudy. Usually these have little icons, a shade, a tungsten, a fluorescent, a flash, and custom just means you're manually adjusting these little sliders, okay? But these are your presets. Normally, I'll try auto. Auto tends to get a little warmer. In this case, it did it a little bit cooler. It's trying to make this more of a neutral color, and it's not accurate, I know. So I'm actually going to go back up to as shot, but I could try daylight. And daylight's a little warm, and we could try tungsten, which is not going to look good. But if you took an image in lighting with old incandescent light bulbs, tungsten's going to work really well and get you in a better spot. In this case, we're going to start with as shot. Now, if I want to adjust it a little bit to get it more accurate to how I saw it or how I want it, I can slide these, and they're really easy because on temperature, this side makes it more cool, and this side makes it more warm. So if we go this way, it cools it off. If we go this way, it makes it more warm. So I can adjust this one and say, hey, maybe that's where I want it. Down here, we have tint. Tint is simple. This side is green. This side is more magenta. You do not want to make faces magenta because it's really difficult to get rid of. So don't adjust one part of your image to make it look better and then have the face or skin magenta because, yeah, you can't fix it. You need to make it black and white then. But if you need to tweak it one way or another, and usually when I'm doing adjustments, it's just like -1, 2, or 3, or -1, 2, or 3, because I have pretty accurate exposures. So I can tweak it either way. Vibrance. So I don't suggest people increase the vibrance or the saturation. So saturation is going to add color to all your colors, okay? And vibrance is going to add colors to certain colors, all right? So in this case, it's making the greens and the yellows more vibrant. When you're toning, you usually don't want to start off at extremes, meaning super contrasty, super saturated. I tend to be on the flat side because if your image is contrasty or super bright or super colorful, it can make it difficult in the long run to make adjustments. So adding vibrance and saturation is something that you can do at the end after you've done your basic toning, and it simplifies the process. So I suggest to students not to use these. So we'll click reset, reset, and those are back to where they were. And over here, you'll see this little eyeball that we have. If you want to see what it looked like before, you can click it off to take it off, and that's what it's going to look like now. So that's the difference. Right here is a color picker or a white balance tool. Not a fan with this because it does weird things. So if you click this and we click on her skin, it's gonna make it look weird, because what happens is it tries to achieve neutral gray. Like what neutral gray is on the RGB, if you were to have all three of the numbers exactly the same, and we'll see this later in Photoshop. So you have red, green, and blue. If the numbers are 22, 22, 22, that's neutral gray. If they're 158, 158, 158, that's a neutral gray. So it's trying to do this, but in this case, it should be warmer because we shot later in the afternoon and we want that golden sun. So the white balance doesn't really work in this situation in photography too well because it does weird things. So I'm going to hit that Command Z and undo that. Okay, and we're going to get rid of that magenta because that's driving me nuts. We'll adjust this one a little bit here. So that's color, okay? When we click on light, which is our next important adjustment, we have exposure, which is overall exposure. So to the right makes it too bright, to the left makes it darker. Contrast, and I tell people to tone flat in the beginning, because if you need to open up your shadows and they're really thick and black like this, you're going to have to adjust them more. If they're flatter, and I'll just lower this contrast a lot, you can see it opens up the tonal range of those shadows, and it makes it so when you brighten this, you don't have to brighten it as much. Because in the end, you can always increase your black point and get that contrast that gives you that pop in photography. So when I say tone flat, I don't want you to keep it flat forever. This is something I do at the end of toning in Photoshop. But you'll normally see me in these tutorials just lower that contrast a little bit. Highlights, so we can make our highlights bright and we can make our highlights dark. So one of the most important things in photography is to not overexpose your highlights, because if you do, you can't get them back. So if you get rid of the detail in something bright like teeth or a white t-shirt, it's going to be just pure white with no detail, and it looks absolutely horrible. When you're taking an exposure, if you shoot the image because you're unsure a little bit dark, that is better than overexposing it a little bit bright. Next thing we have is shadows. So if we want to open up the shadow areas, we go to the right. If we want to darken our shadow areas, which is rare, you go to the left. So usually I'm toning flat. I'm just opening those up. This is great, especially when there's something in shadow areas. Whites, I don't really use it, but it's adjusting the whites. So you're making the whites brighter, the whites darker, okay? Usually it's just adding gray to the whites. Not a big fan of it. In blacks, unless you have a really flat image like this, I wouldn't even suggest adjusting blacks. This is another one of those, and you'll learn that I'm pretty blunt and forward as to how I do things. And this is something that I do in Photoshop, not here in Adobe Camera RAW. These are all global adjustments, and these global adjustments mean that when you adjust something, it affects the whole image. Now we can also come up here and use this little masking icon, and we're going to take a look at that in the next video. And so what the masking adjustment allows you to do is make selective adjustments. And most adjustments in photography are selective, meaning, hey, I just want to brighten up this area, not this whole image. And what you don't want to do in global adjustments is to like brighten up one area, all right? So you want to brighten up the background, but it's making her face too dark. So in that case, don't make the global adjustment because it's not helping the image. You want to do those selectively. We can do the face and the background independently. These are things that you should always do every time with every image that you ever get. The rest of the stuff is somewhat subjective, okay? And what we're going to do is we'll take a look at these other adjustments here in the next video, and selective and what some of this other stuff means. So one of my goals is to keep concise and as short as I can possible with giving you the information that I want you to have. So what I want you to do is just start opening up images and try to make these basic adjustments to your photos. And then once you get done with that and you're comfortable with that, then move on to the next video and we'll take a look at some effects, the curves, the color mixer, color grading. Most of these you're probably not going to use inside of Adobe Camera RAW, but you can. But we'll take a look at that, and then we'll take a look at the selective adjustments, which is going to be a little bit confusing because you have to understand the concept of a mask. You need to understand it because everything you do in Photoshop relies on a mask. Well, hopefully that has been helpful. One of the greatest things you can do for me is give me a thumbs up, watch these videos in entirety, and subscribe if you're not a subscriber. If you have any comments or questions, you can leave those down below, and have a wonderful day.